Okay, I have 10:05, so I think we can get started. I want to thank everybody for joining me today, particularly joining us by Zoom. Doing a press conference remotely is a first for me, so please bear with us. And before I get into the substance of what we want to discuss today, I want to make a few announcements about the logistics of this press conference. First, if you haven't noticed already, everybody's muted except for me. And we're going to unmute our speakers once I introduce them. And then after we hear from all our speakers, any member of the media who wants to ask a question, you can raise your hand, and then we're going to call on you, and then we'll all mute you for the moderators. We'll all mute you for your question. And to let everyone know, media has the ability to record this press conference, and we're going to record it also. So if anybody wants a recording of it, you can just reach out to my office. And last but not least, we're carrying this press conference live on Facebook. So if anybody wants to see it there, they can. We had a little technical difficulty putting it on my Facebook page, so we're going to put it on Mike Frazier, my press secretary's Facebook page. So just go on Facebook and search for Michael Frazier, F-R-A-S-E-R is his name, and you can get that from Facebook. So now that the logistics are out of the way, I just want to again thank everyone for being here. If you haven't guessed already, my name is Will Barkley, and I'm the Assembly Minority Leader. And I'm honored to be here with my colleagues from our great Assembly Conference. And also I'm happy to be here with our distinguished guest, who you're going to hear from shortly. And the purpose of this press conference is to bring awareness to the growing lawlessness in New York and advocate the restoration of law and order in our state. I think we've all seen the reports, we've seen the statistics, we've seen the violent incidents, the tragedies playing out in our street. And frankly, it's our thought that things are getting out of control. You may be aware New York City is seeing the bloodiest summer it has seen in decades, but it's not just New York City. Frankly, no part of the state is immune to this lawlessness. And I want to provide you with a few statistics just to prove my point. These are statistics year to date from 2019 to this year. New York City has seen an increase of homicides by 27%. Burglaries are up 45%. Shootings up 63%. And their shooting victims, 19 versus this year, 439 in 2019, 717 this year. Listen to this one. In Albany, homicides are up 800%, burglaries are up 2%, shootings up 379%, shooting victims 14 in 2019, so far this year 67 victims. In Buffalo, homicides are up 88%, shootings are up 54%, shooting victims in 19 were 78, this year they're 120. In Rochester, homicides are up 40%. Burglaries are at 16% increase from last year, and shootings are up 46%. Shooting victims, 2019, 89, this year, 130. And close to where I am, Syracuse, homicides are up 21%, and burglaries are up 31%. We couldn't get the statistics on the shootings or the shooting victims, but as soon as we get them, we'll let people know. Well, we can't say for sure what exactly is causing a spike in crime. In my mind, I think in our conference mind, it's hard not to conclude that it hasn't been a result of the endless pro-criminal policies that have been passed in Albany over the last few years. And our conference has raised questions and points with all this legislation. I think we understand that you can't legislate in a vacuum, and the fact that when we pass these pro-criminal bills, frankly, that passage has consequences, and I think it's showing up in these statistics. And quite simply, we need to change our priorities, and we need to change the direction that our state's going in. And frankly, we have to do that immediately. And this isn't about politics. This is about the safety for our New York citizens and trying to protect those, and particularly help those who are being hurt and threatened. I just want to give as way of illustration of some of the mentality that we have in Albany. Our state legislator has supported publicly releasing false or unsubstantiated claims against police officers. But then again, on the flip side, it prohibits police departments from releasing mugshots or booking information of suspected criminals. I mean, who are we protecting in this scenario? So with that, it's just some opening comments. I want to introduce our first guest. I'm pleased to have with us the president of the New York State Sheriff's Association. We have Washington County Sheriff Jeff Murphy. So if you could unmute Jeff and please let him speak. Jeff, are you on?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, good.
Floor is yours.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me today. I think the last time I saw many of you was at the Capitol when the infamous bail reform laws were passed, and we were very concerned with where things were going at that time, and it was kind of the beginning of a lot of this anti-law enforcement, pro-criminal legislation that was going on in our state. And since then, as you all know, and that's why we're here today, it seems to be endless, and it seems to be all the legislation that comes out is actually handcuffing us more and more as the police. And I'm not surprising that you quoted those statistics, because that's kind of what we said back in February to March, was that we're very concerned about what's going to happen in our state if this pro-criminal agenda continues, and that's exactly what has happened. You know, and I happened to see an article from 1968 the other day, and it was the Attorney General was talking at the time. There was a lot of division in the country, a lot of unrest, a lot of violence. And he said that at that time in history, in the country's history, there's never been a more important time to have law enforcement. And I really think would be appropriate to say now. And that if law enforcement isn't given the opportunity to do their job and protect the citizens, and that, you know, we could see more unrest, we could see more rioting, we could see more violence, we could see the statistics that you just quoted keep going up. And there could be a division in our state that would take generations to heal. And I think it's extremely important that the people understand that while, you know, things have happened in the country that have affected different parts of the country, we're very proud as sheriffs in New York State, and we work very closely with the chiefs of police as well. We're very proud of all of our offices, and we've taken great strides in every area of the county to protect the citizens, and also to afford our officers with the training that's required to do their job. The latest things to come out of Albany, including the governor's executive order for police reform, we're not opposed to looking at how we can do things better, certainly. But the way that these orders are issued without the proper legislative procedure is obviously a problem. We have no say in what was in the order. We have no input as to how we can work with the state to be better. And that's all we ask for, just like we asked for in the spring. So a lot of us have already taken steps to better train our officers to deal with some of the issues that are going on across the country and across the state. And again, I couldn't be more proud of the men and women that, while we sleep at night, drive the streets of our cities, towns, and villages and protect us. And I really appreciate you having me on today. And I could go on forever, but I'll let you go to somebody else. But thanks again.
Thank you, Sheriff, and we appreciate your advocacy on behalf of law enforcement here in New York State, and let you know that you have a friend with our conference in Albany. Next, we have Police Chief Patrick Phelan. He's from the town of Greece, and he's here to represent the New York State Associations of Chiefs of Police. Chief, are you on?
Yes, thanks for having me, sir. You know, my good friend Sheriff Murphy makes a great point. We're not completely opposed to change. We know that any organization can always get better. We don't sit here believing that we're perfect and without flaw. We believe that we can always be better, and that there's ways to get better. The problem is that the majority in the legislature refuses to work with us. We've told them time and time again that we need to be part of the process. We need to have input. We can give you feedback from stakeholders, which would be the not logical way to make decisions. Instead, they ignore us. They issue edicts, having no idea what the unintended consequences are going to be. And this anti-police mission that they're on is clearly going to lead to an increase in crime. And the effect on the constituents that you all serve is that they are less safe. And anybody could tell you that. We told them that before they started on their mission of anti-police, pro-criminal legislation. And this is going to continue. It's going to get worse. People are going to get less safe. And, you know, if we were able to work together, I think we could come to an understanding where everybody at least felt comfortable that we were doing the right thing. But that is not the way things are done in the state of New York right now. And it's unfortunate, it's sad, because people are going to die. Listen, I tell people I get up every day, and my mission in life is to keep people safe. I have 96,000 residents in my town. I say my job every day is to keep 96,000 people safe so they can go about their business, go to their job, go to their school, spend time with their family, and live the American dream. And they do all that while I'm keeping them safe. It's my only mission. And right now, New York State is taking away my ability to keep people safe. And that's just wrong. So I thank you for your support. I hope that we can affect some sort of change in the state of New York so people can just be safe, whether they're Democrat or Republican or independent, it doesn't matter. We all just want a safe place for our families to live.
Thank you, Chief. Well said, and we couldn't agree with you more. Next up, we're honored to have the Ressler County District Attorney, Mary Pat Donnelly. Mary Pat, thanks for being with us. The floor is yours if you're there.
I'm here. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. As Will stated, I'm the Ressler County District Attorney, and I'm here today to urge our legislators to carefully consider public safety as a component of any further reforms. A year ago, I stood with law enforcement and expressed my concern about the upcoming reforms that went into effect in January. And unfortunately, I don't think anyone can deny that a lot of my concerns have come to fruition. We are dealing with an unusually high rate of uncooperative witnesses, scared defendants, and scared witnesses and brazen defendants who are reoffending. The stories of defendants standing in court and telling the judge, I know you can't hold me on bail reform, they're well documented, and it has caused a tide amongst the criminal justice system. Here in the city of Troy alone, shootings are up 600% from this time last year. It is almost a nightly occurrence with shots fired. In June, we saw an 18-year-old soon-to-be high school graduate killed by a stray bullet. The community is outraged by this, and I have been walking the streets during the pandemic and speaking with residents, and they want law and order. They want us to take care of them, and they want us to keep them safe. The repeal of 50A is yet another example of legislation which demands a drastic outcome, but it didn't have any money or any means to make it happen. As the prior speaker stated, we want transparency. We want a system that everybody can place their trust in. Nothing about the repeal of 50A has changed my job. We have always had an obligation under statute and ethics to turn over relevant information regarding an officer's disciplinary history. But now you're talking about making it completely public information without giving any time or mechanism for the municipalities and the district attorney to get together to make sure that we have a full picture and that we are both turning over the same information, because you know what's going to happen when the city has a certain folio and I have a different one. My cases are going to be severely jeopardized, and we've already seen things like that happen. We already have judges telling us we can't comply with the new discovery mandates till we have that information. So we need time, money, and again, manpower. In short, I really want our legislators to recognize, and I think all of us do recognize, the tension, the distrust in our nation and in our state. You can't legislate that away. That's going to be fixed as a result of conversations, as a result of everyone acknowledging that we're at a precipice, we have a problem, and we all want to fix it, because at the end of the day, everybody wants to feel safe. And the good men and women in law enforcement deserve to be heard on these issues, which impact their profession. And I really hope that we can come to the table and learn from what happened last year. The intent of bail reform was noble. Nobody wants anyone sitting in jail because they can't afford bail. But we need to do it right and bring the stakeholders in so that we can have the proper result. And most of all, we can have public safety. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I really want to say thank you for staying up. You've been with us in almost all these criminal justice so-called reforms and making your voice heard. And it really helps us make that argument when we need to make that argument. So thank you again for being with us. Next, we're honored to have the Fulton County Sheriff, Richard Giardino, with us. Sheriff, can you hear us? Or are you on the line?
I'm on the line. I want to thank you for inviting me. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Okay, listen, this is my first press conference Zoom meeting. I feel like I'm in a hostage video, so please bear with me. I'm not a big fan of this type of thing. I come with a very unique perspective. I have been elected district attorney. I was an assistant DA in Nassau County. I've been a county court judge for 20 years, and now I'm a sheriff. I've sat on over 200 trials, including 40 murder cases, where I've had whites killing whites, young black men killing young black men. I've had police officers shot. I've had any possibility you can have. Whites shooting blacks, blacks killing whites. And one thing that is true across the board is the first obligation of government is public safety. So I echo what Chief Phelan said and what Sheriff Murphy. Our first obligation is public safety as a legislature, as a government, because if people aren't safe, nothing else really matters. That's number one. I believe what's going on with the passage of all these laws is it's a paralysis of the police. And once you paralyze us from doing our jobs, you are risking public safety, not only to the officers, but to the public in general. I think another truth that everyone would agree on, when we take a 911 call and we dispatch an officer or officers to a scene, we don't ask, what color are you? We don't ask what race or what your race is. We don't ask your religion. We don't ask whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or independent. We send our patrol cars and we do what we have to do to protect the individuals. And by the same token, in the rural areas where the sheriffs respond to everything from domestic violence and cows in the roadway to fatal accidents or serious accidents, the people who, when we get there and we make a difference in somebody's family's life, we save a family member, we get EMS rolling, I don't think anyone in this state cares what color the officer was, what color EMS was, what religion, and what their politics are. So I feel very strongly that it doesn't matter when we do our jobs properly. Is there room for improvement? Certainly, but people keep forgetting there's over 800,000 law enforcement officers in this country, and we have hundreds of millions of contacts with the public every year. It's unbelievable the amount of contact, and when something goes wrong, everyone sees it. When something goes right, you rarely hear about it. What I'd like to do is appropriate Governor Cuomo's phrase of pause, and I would ask the legislature to consider a pause on passing any further legislation till they have input from those involved in the system. I also am very disturbed by some of the rules that seem to be one-sided. The 50A repeal causes great concern to me as a former judge, as does the access to complaints. As I read the legislation that was passed, it says they have access to complaints. Anyone can make a complaint against a police officer, and I fear that this will become a tool for defense attorneys to have clients make a complaint so it goes in the officer's record. When we have a trial, a defendant, before he takes the stand, is entitled to a Sandoval and Molyneux hearing. These hearings guarantee that a judge reviews any prior bad acts or criminal record that could be used to cross-examine or used against this defendant. With witnesses like police officers, there is no such hearing provided. It's solely at the discretion of the judge. So if somebody makes a complaint against you, whether it's founded or unfounded, that could be used against officers. My fear as a former judge is that that will take away the search for justice, the search for truth, and be based on the conduct or misconduct of the police and not whether or not a crime was committed and the defendant committed it. Well, the other factor that's a lot of concern is we've done a lot with police. They keep talking about social workers and mental health professionals. We all have very strong training records in all agencies across the state and the police academies on mental health. If you ask any of the officers, the chiefs of police, the sheriffs, the state police, the vast majority of increased crime, especially during COVID, has been mental health calls. And we go there, we deal with people who commit suicide, attempt to commit suicide, or armed, threaten their loved ones, and they get taken for mental health evaluation immediately. So our training is not only to go out and find probable cause to arrest someone, but to realize the difference between somebody who may be intoxicated or on drugs and someone with a mental health problem and act. Another thing that's significant to me is in 1994, and I see many of the people on this call haven't been around that long, but New York passed the Domestic Violence Act. And a lot of the speakers in the Assembly and the Senate talked about the fact that O.J. Simpson killed his wife. Well, he had not been convicted at that time. It was pre-trial, and he ended up being acquitted. But a lot of that legislation, what we call the pro-arrest policy, that instead of the cycle where the police would go to a house and say, why don't you sober up, come back tomorrow, leave the residence, we'll take you somewhere, it turned into, if you assault a significant other, whether male or female, you're arrested if probable cause exists. It allowed us to incarcerate these people for a cooling off period. A lot of that's been lost. I do believe we need a serious dialogue about race relations between whites and blacks and between law enforcement and minority communities. But in order to do that, two things I think have to be recognized. Number one, we have to take the race card off the table so that if somebody says all lives matter, that doesn't make them a racist. They don't understand the genesis of Black Lives Matter. It's similar to the 1960s where they say black is beautiful. That was in response to cultural stereotypes against blacks. And the same thing with Black Lives Matter. It doesn't say all lives don't matter. So there's got to be some education without calling someone a racist so they can speak freely. But the second part is got to be consequences. When we have an incident go bad, it usually escalates. So when police officers tell you, stay where you are, put your hands up, turn around, drop what you got in your hands. I don't care what color you are, drop what you have in your hands, turn around, comply with the police, and that will prevent it from escalating into these situations that are, in my opinion, very rare. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, Sheriff. And obviously the breadth of your experience shows with your knowledge of the issues and your articulation of those too. So thank you very much for being here and speaking at this press conference. Next up, we have our great assemblyman from Western New York, Joe Giglio, who was a former state deputy inspector general and has a lot of experience and led our efforts against these so-called bail reform. Joe, are you there? And you have the floor if you are.
I am, leader. I'm here.
Great. It's all yours.
Ready? Okay. Thank you very much. It's very interesting when you listen to the pros of law enforcement talk about how it works. And it really always troubled me about the way they paint everybody with the same brush, and that somehow these people don't care. If you've noticed from the DA and from the sheriffs and from the police, that all of them care. They chose this profession because they cared, and they've dedicated their lives to it. And for some reason, that's all forgotten. But the one thing that I would like to touch on, or actually two things. The first thing is, I think the chief touched on it, and so did the sheriffs. When the women and men in law enforcement start hesitating to do their duty, people will be getting hurt. Innocent people will be getting hurt, they will be getting hurt, and there will be an awful price to pay. And at some point, people have to start defending that. The second thing is something that our conference has stood for from the beginning. Victims, victims, victims. When you cite these statistics, you see that there are victims at the other end of these statistics. And for some reason, they are not commented on. And as a conference, we have gone to defend them, and we will continue to defend them. The second part of the victimization thing is, I believe most of those victims happen to be poor also. And so what happens to them? What help do they get? Who defends them? What happens to them? So the more victims we create, that somehow makes things better. I don't get it and never will. Don't want to, quite frankly. So it is our belief that the victims have to have an advocate. Our conference has been that advocate. We will continue to advocate for them, and we will continue to look at the right ways to do things. That was the comment back when we got together in the winter. There's a right way to do this. There is no knee-jerk reaction necessary. There are reports out there on how to do this. There's training out there. There's all those good things out there to help. But when you try to do it one-sidedly and force things without any preparation, this is what we get. This is what happens in our communities. That's what we've been saying all along. Let's keep everybody safe, and please let's not forget the victims. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks for your continued leadership on these law enforcement issues. Next up, we have Angelo Nello, another Western New Yorker, also a former judge and the ranker on the Assembly Codes Committee. So he's been intimately involved in all these issues. Judge, are you there? And
I'm available and I'm ready. Thank you,
you
Leader.
have the floor.
Good morning, all. We are strongly suggesting the same logic and focus utilized to address the COVID pandemic, that being facts and statistics, be applied to address the crime pandemic. Let's call it what it is. There is no denying there has been an upward surge in crime across the entire state. Yet it appears many would like to ignore the facts. Whatever perceived reasons are, we cannot continue to ignore the facts. People are dying. Children are being collateral consequences and being killed. As a retired criminal court judge, I am saddened that judicial discretion has been either limited or taken away completely. This is an insult to all good judges because of a few that may have utilized flawed discretion. This is being applied to all judges unfairly. We cannot paint all judges with the same broad brush. It is the judge who has access to allegations, criminal history, and is able to visually assess the defendant. In many instances, this has allowed the defendant to be assigned a treatment to address needs, mental health treatment, drug addiction, alcohol addiction. Some years ago, the legislature in its wisdom passed legislation for what is called diversion court. Those that have been arrested and accused of crimes that have emanated from an underlying addiction need to be addressed. They are put into programs with the opportunity to avoid any criminal penalties should they go through the treatment program. We have addressed the needs of defendants throughout, and we have always worked to protect their needs. Let's also not forget that the state legislature every year uses taxpayer dollars to have every defendant represented during arraignments and during the proceedings before them. We recognize we need to protect the rights of the defendant, but we also have an obligation to protect law-abiding citizens. This is the job of law enforcement and judges. It appears that the majority of abuse stems from New York City, Rikers Island. They keep talking about one specific case, but the sad part is nobody has bothered to look into the background and facts of what they are using as their cry for change. If you look into the facts of that case, there's many intervening issues that have not been brought up. And so we have a headline, but nobody wants to read the article. That has caused uncertainty throughout all professions dealing with law enforcement and with the criminal justice system. Nobody wants to see a defendant abused. But you know what bothers me? I don't think I've ever heard one person, other than those in this video or this Zoom, talk about follow the law, don't commit a crime. It's like wholesale acceptability of just committing crime. I've heard mayors say, well, if they're committing petty larceny and they say they're hungry and they were stealing food, don't arrest them. Well, who's going to make up for that? The taxpayer. We need to have some balance. And what I'd like to end is this. We must begin to discuss all actions have consequences. Some are positive, some are negative. It seems society has morphed into let's only accept the positives and ignore the negatives. So remember, my final words are, we must all be prepared to suffer the consequences of our actions, and we cannot intervene and make them think that they can go forth without any consequences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge. Those are very good words. Last but certainly not least is a person who's been really a very vocal member of our conference on these law enforcement issues, and rightfully so. Mike Riley is a former NYPD member, great member from Staten Island, and certainly no shrinking violet when it comes to advocating for law enforcement issues that we think are the right policy for New York State. So Mike, if you're there, the floor is yours.
Leader, thank you so much for your kind words and putting this press conference together. And thank you for all the members who are participating and our distinguished guests. You know, you heard a lot from our distinguished guests about the laws and the policies that are negatively impacting our communities. As one of the few legislators who actually wore the New York City Police Department uniform and patrolled the streets of New York City, I want to give you a glimpse into the other side of things. I want you to get a glimpse of the service, the commitment, the empathy of what police officers do every day. Because unfortunately, the negative rhetoric that has permeated the conversation has really hurt our community relations. And yes, as the speakers before me have said, there are always room for improvement, and we're always striving for that. But I want you to get a glimpse of, like I said, that empathy, that commitment, that passion, that service officers bring to our communities. My friend Pat Russo is a retired sergeant. Cops and Kids, it's a boxing organization that builds community relations. It's been around over 2 decades. They're reaching those kids in those underprivileged neighborhoods. They're making positive impact. Law Enforcement Explorer programs, reaching hundreds of kids in the Boy Scout model, giving them leadership skills, service to our community, showing them what it means to serve others. What about officers on patrol? Getting that call to an 8-month-old baby who's not breathing. That officer puts everything to the side, carries that baby down the stairs, giving them CPR, handing them off to EMS, praying that that baby lives. Regardless of the nature of that baby, where they're from, what community, because we care. Arriving first to the scene of that 16-year-old shot in the chest, looking at them, kneeling down over him, holding his hand, telling him he's going to be okay. But unfortunately, watching him take his last breath, and you were the last person he sees. Those are some experience that you've never heard in the news. You've never heard them reported in the news. Those positive interactions, but unfortunate circumstances. Those are firsthand things that I dealt with. And I'm not saying it for accolades. I'm saying it because these are the things that people need to hear. They need to understand that our cops are there in their communities to help them. I patrolled some pretty tough neighborhoods in New York City. 6-7 precinct, East Flatbush. 9-0 precinct, Williamsburg. Many of my colleagues in the 7-3 precinct in Brownsville. 7-5 precinct, East New York. 4-6 precinct in the Bronx. There's one thing in common. There are wonderful people in those communities that want the police there, because the police are that line between chaos and order. We have people in housing developments, seniors, that cannot go to their mailbox to get their mail. Why? Because gangbangers are controlling their hallways. That is unacceptable. That is where we need to step up together as a community. And yes, are there difficulties? Are there implicit biases on each side? Absolutely. But those deep conversations are what we need to have. And those deep conversations will get us to know each other. Maybe actually hear about those stories of that 8-month-old or that poor family that lost that 16-year-old that was shot and killed on Avenue D. But these are the things that I want people to understand. And I want us to join together. And you know what? This is a prime opportunity for us to get this message out there. And I want to thank the leader again for putting this together. I want to join our distinguished guests and my fellow colleagues in the Assembly in our conference for taking part in this. And I want to thank the press for getting this message out. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my experiences and some of the things that I think we can work on to improve relations. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Very powerful, very good words. So we appreciate your participation in this too. Okay, now we're going to move to what I would call the more challenging part of this Zoom press conference, is getting questions from the media. As I said at the beginning of this, if you're interested in asking a question, raise your hand. You'll go into a queue, and then our moderators will unmute you. And then when you get unmuted, just once say who you are, so I know who you are. And then if you want to ask me a question or any of our speakers questions, just indicate who you want to ask a question to. So we'll give it a shot here. Let's see how it goes. So raise your hand if you're interested in asking a question.
Hey, Will, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Seth.
Good morning. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Two things. First one real quick. Can you just give me the source on those statistics? Is it just from the respective departments of the municipalities you mentioned?
That's my understanding. We reach directly out to all the police departments, and we can back them up if you want. And we can also provide them to you directly. I know it's sometimes hard to get it verbally.
Yeah, that would be great. The next thing I wanted to talk about. Now, I'm not trying to blow in Sheriff Don Hilton because I'm a big fan of his and he's very helpful. But we get mugshots from our county sheriff, and it's great for the paper and for our content. But it's a department that's operating in a state of non-compliance with what the governor has said he wants to do. How far does non-compliance go in departments that feel like they're not getting the support they need from the state or from local elected officials? Is it going to end up being a morale problem? Is it already a morale problem?
Well, I think any of our law enforcement officials can probably speak on the morale, but it's hard for me not to think that there isn't a morale problem when there's been such an anti-police narrative out there that I suspect there is a morale problem, and we've heard it a little bit, but I would, our police, law enforcement members, I don't know if they want to speak to that, maybe Chief Phelan or Sheriff Murphy or Sheriff Giardino want to speak to that. That might be helpful. And just to let everybody know, when Seth is a reporter for the Palladium Times in Oswego County, and he referenced the Oswego County Sheriff Don Hilton. Do any of our law enforcement members want to speak to Seth's question about morale in the police departments? Go ahead, Patrick Phelan.
So first of all, to address your question about mugshots, that's just another example of poorly written law. If you read that law carefully, it only applies to the state police, and it does allow you to release mugshots. So, almost every law that comes out of Albany these days is poorly written and flawed, and that's just one of them. And no offense to those in,
except for the ones we do, of course.
I know you're not writing them. But with regard to morale, I would say, obviously, that's an understatement to say there's a morale problem. I would say there's deep concern by every law enforcement officer in New York about the consequences of getting in a police car and doing their job. Will they end up in jail at the end of the night? Will they end up losing their home and their pension and everything they've worked for? What can I actually go out and do my job? I think is the question every police officer is asking themselves, and that's the state that law enforcement is in right now, and that leads to a lack of public safety because officers are going to be hesitant to do what they need to do to protect people, and that's where we're at, and I only fear it's going to get worse with some of the proposed legislation that has yet to be passed, but is imminent.
Okay, I apologize. I had to mute for a second. Just to let anyone from the media know, you can physically raise your hand, but I guess also Zoom, as some of you may know, has the ability to, under the, I think the chat button or the more button, you can raise your hand virtually too. So we do have another question. Go ahead. Who's it from?
Kate Lisa.
Kate Lisa, do you have a question?
Hi, yes, I do. Can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, thank you so much. So I actually have two questions for you. So the first one is, I'm, through this conversation, I was hearing both criticism of some of the governor's executive orders, but also, with the request that it's important that we have this community conversation to discuss the implicit biases on both sides, between the community and the police. So I just was curious about what are the feelings about Cuomo's executive order from June requiring the police department statewide to reinvent their police strategies. Isn't that the idea? Isn't that what this is supposed to be doing? And are we looking at that as the way forward to do that, to rebuild that trust?
So again, I think, the concern is it's going to be a top-down approach to do that. But in my mind, at least he's asking for input from the local police department. So I think that's a positive step. But again, why don't we ask maybe Sheriff Rich Giardino can give his thoughts on the governor's executive order, and I can fill in with our conference thoughts too. Are you there, Sheriff? And do you have any thoughts on that?
First of all, many agencies in New York are accredited, and that's a series of 109 areas that they have to be proficient in, and they have to be in compliance with a model out of DCGS, Division of Criminal Justice Services. Many of us feel that we don't have a lot to reboot or renew ourselves. What we need to do is upgrade some things, and we do have a use of force continuum. We do have constant training that we're required. I wanted to respond to the morale issue too. Two things are happening that I see in law enforcement. One is we're seeing a lot of individuals who are at retirement age that will stick around for a couple more years, putting in their papers now or meeting with retirement because it's just not worth it for them. They don't want to get sued. They don't want to get charged. And they just don't want to be micromanaged when they're trying to do the best they can to protect the public and themselves. But also, when I bring young people in for interviews, the interview panels are asking, in light of what's going on, why are you interested in being a police officer? And it goes both ways. Many of them say because they want to do good, they want to try to make a difference. So that's still a positive, but a lot of the younger ones not understanding what they're getting into. But in regard to the order from the governor, the executive order, many of us already are up to par in many of those areas. And I'm a very rural county, but I will tell you, I hesitated to put this on Facebook, on our department Facebook, because I struggled with it. About a week and a half ago, one of our deputies went into a convenience store gas station, and as he was going in, there was a young black male exiting, and he held the door for him, and the male that he held the door for spit at the ground, there his feet, and called him an F police officer. And we're in a very rural, very low African-American population, very low minority population, very few problems. We've had 3 peaceful protests. But that was disturbing to me because respect has got to go both ways. And the officer was trying to be polite to whoever it was, but it threw him off. It threw him for a loop that it would happen, especially in our rural community. So I think there's a lot of morale things. I think that the executive order is overdone. And once again, as the chief said, it's not from the legislature, but it's coming from the governor without much thought. Just you have to do this. You got to do it right away. You have to have the stakeholders. Well, I have some very rural towns with no problems. I say no problems. I mean, no race, police, community issues. And it's going to be hard to come up with a plan that doesn't apply. And again, it's one size fits all in New York, which is inaccurate. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sheriff. Good points. Kate, Lisa, does that answer your question?
More or less, I suppose. Yeah, I was interested in the opinion of it, so I appreciate it. Thank you. The other thing I did want to ask is, everyone has been referencing, it sounds like, more legislation that they are concerned about in regards to this. So can you please specify which bills specifically you're referring to?
Well, I think it's a whole host of things. First, as I mentioned, I think there's the anti-police narrative out there that I think's got to change. And I think we heard from our law enforcement people here today and our members who've served in law enforcement that, people get into law enforcement not to do bad, but to do good. And we have to realize that they're out there, trying to protect the public and doing the best they can. And of course, in any organization, you might have one or two bad apples, but on a whole, I think we have to change the narrative and say, hey, we support our law enforcement, and we shouldn't be bashing them every chance we get. So that's one point. As far as just general legislation, I think, one, we have to stop the onslaught of anti-law enforcement legislation. And hopefully, once we see the results of the bills that pass, whether it's 50A, whether it's the bail reform, even raise the age, which I think a lot of people were supportive of, but has some faults in that legislation, is there ways that we can amend that legislation working together with all stakeholders, not just, again, coming from the legislature and that part of our legislature that's, anti-law enforcement to push us through, but let's get the input from the people on the front lines. Let's get the input from the DAs. Let's get the input from the judges, and let's get the input from the police, and maybe we all can work. And we're not saying that some reform isn't valid. I think everybody here on this call has said some reform is valid, but let's do it in a smart, educated way instead of a knee-jerk anti-police way. Does that answer your question? Okay, next we have Morgan McKay. Morgan, we're going to unmute you, and you can ask your question. Just if you want to ask me the question or whoever you want to ask the question, just express it. Oh, before you start, Morgan, just one more thing. I guess the clarity on raising your hand, it's in the upper right-hand corner. There's a little hand-raising icon, right? Okay. Sorry, Morgan. The floor is yours.
No worries. My question actually just got asked, so I'm good. Thank you so much, guys.
Oh, thank you. Okay, do we have, hold on, I'm just hearing from that's it. All right, again, I want to thank everybody for participating today. I want to thank the media for listening to us, and particularly want to thank our distinguished guests for speaking. We're going to keep up on this issue. We're going to continue to monitor the rise in crime, and just want to finish off by emphasizing we can't let this slip. Our lives of our citizens and their well-being is at stake, so we're going to keep hammering on it. So we can also, any members from the media that want a copy of this press conference, please reach out to Mike Frazier, and we can provide you with a recording. So again, thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend, and stay safe out there.